The transport shuttle touched down at New Atlanta Spaceport just after dawn. Marcus Cole pressed his hand against the cold window and watched the city lights flicker in the morning haze. 7 years had passed since he last stood on Earth. 7 years of war in the outer colonies fighting against the Kryn Collective. 7 years of commanding soldiers and making impossible decisions. Now he was home, and all he wanted was a cup of coffee from his own cafe. Marcus gathered his small bag and moved through the spaceport with the other passengers. People rushed past him without a second glance. No one recognized the decorated commander in civilian clothes. His cybernetic left arm caught a few stares, the silver metal visible below his short sleeve. The scarring around where the artificial limb connected to his shoulder told stories he preferred not to share. A bomb on Proxima Station had taken his original arm and 17 of his soldiers. He survived. They did not. That memory never left him. The city had changed in his absence. New buildings reached toward the sky, and holographic advertisements floated above the streets. Anti-gravity transit pods weaved between towers like silver fish in a technological ocean. But some things remained the same. Marcus smiled as he walked the familiar route from the transit station toward the stellar grounds. He had founded the Café 12 years ago with his life savings and a dream of creating a community space where everyone felt welcome. It had been his pride and joy before the war called him away. The morning air was cool, and Marcus took his time walking. His body ached from the long journey, and his mind felt heavy with exhaustion. He thought about the battles he had fought and the lives he had saved. The Battle of Proxima Station alone had protected 3 million colonists from certain death. But none of that mattered now. He was just a man who wanted to see his cafe and perhaps remember what peace felt like. When the stellar grounds came into view, Marcus stopped on the sidewalk. The exterior looked different. The warm brown and orange colors he had chosen were gone, replaced with sleek gray and black panels. The large windows that once invited people to look inside were now tinted dark. The hand-painted sign he had made himself was replaced with a glowing holographic display. Marcus felt a twist in his stomach but pushed the worry aside. Change was natural. Maybe the updates were good for business. He pushed open the door and stepped inside. The smell of coffee hit him immediately, and for a moment everything felt right. Then his eyes adjusted to the dim lighting, and he saw what his cafe had become. The comfortable couches and mismatched chairs were gone. In their place stood expensive-looking metal furniture that seemed designed to discourage people from staying too long. The walls were bare and cold. The warm lighting had been replaced with harsh white bulbs. The community board where people posted job offers and event announcements was missing. Marcus spotted Elena Rodriguez behind the counter. She was one of his original employees, a skilled barista who had kept the cafe running during his absence. Her eyes went wide when she saw him, and her face broke into a huge smile. She opened her mouth to call out to him, but before she could speak, someone else appeared. Kevin Brighton moved quickly across the cafe floor toward Marcus. Kevin was young, maybe 28, with perfectly styled hair and an expensive suit. Marcus had hired him 6 months ago as the new manager after conducting interviews via video call. Kevin had seemed competent and enthusiastic during their conversations, but Kevin had never seen Marcus in person. During their video calls, Marcus had worn casual clothes and never mentioned his military service. He preferred to be seen as a business owner, not a soldier. Kevin's expression was not welcoming. His eyes swept over Marcus with obvious disapproval. He took in the worn civilian clothes, the visible cybernetic arm, the tired appearance of a man who had just traveled across the solar system. The cafe was full of well-dressed business professionals sipping overpriced coffee before work. Marcus, in his simple shirt and pants, did not match the image Kevin was trying to maintain. Kevin stepped directly in front of Marcus and spoke in a low but firm voice. He said that the cafe was a private establishment, and they had the right to refuse service to anyone. He suggested that Marcus would be more comfortable at one of the cheaper cafes down the street. His tone was polite, but his meaning was clear. Marcus was not welcome here. Marcus felt the words hit him like a physical blow. He stood frozen in place, unable to process what was happening. This was his cafe. He had built it from nothing. He had chosen every piece of furniture, had painted the walls himself, had interviewed and hired every employee. He had left it in trusted hands when his country called him to war. And now he was being thrown out of his own establishment. Elena dropped the coffee cup she was holding. It shattered on the floor behind the counter, but she did not seem to notice. She moved out from behind the counter with her mouth open in shock. She started to say something, but Kevin held up his hand to silence her without taking his eyes off Marcus. Kevin repeated his suggestion that Marcus leave, and this time his voice was louder. Several customers turned to watch the confrontation. Marcus found his voice. He asked Kevin if he knew who he was speaking to. Kevin's expression hardened. He said it did not matter who Marcus was. The cafe had standards, and Marcus did not meet them. Kevin reached into his pocket and pulled out his communication device. He held it up where Marcus could see it and said if Marcus did not leave immediately, he would call security. The cafe had gone completely silent. Every customer was watching now. Some had pulled out their own devices and were recording the scene. Marcus could see the red lights indicating active video feeds. This confrontation was being broadcast across social networks in real time. The thought briefly crossed his mind that he could end this immediately. His military credentials were stored in his neural implant. One quick scan would verify his identity and his service record. Kevin would realize his mistake and the situation would be resolved. But something stopped Marcus from doing that. He had commanded thousands of soldiers and protected millions of civilians. He had given 7 years of his life and his left arm to protect humanity from an alien threat. Yet here he stood being judged not by his service or his character, but by his appearance, by the color of his skin and his worn clothes and the scars that marked his body. If he revealed his rank and achievements to save himself, what did that say about all the other veterans who faced this same treatment without medals to protect them? What about all the ordinary people who were judged by appearance every day? Marcus asked Kevin a simple question. He asked what crime he had committed that warranted his removal from the cafe. Kevin seemed taken aback by the question. He stammered something about company policy and the right atmosphere. Marcus pressed him. He asked Kevin to be specific about what rules he had broken. Was there a dress code he had violated? Had he behaved inappropriately? Had he threatened anyone? Kevin's face flushed red. He said that Marcus was making a scene and that was reason enough to remove him. Marcus pointed out that Kevin had approached him, not the other way around. He had simply walked into a public cafe. Kevin raised his voice and said this was not a public cafe. It was a private business and they could serve whoever they wanted. Elena finally broke her silence. She rushed forward and put herself between Kevin and Marcus. Her voice shook with emotion as she told Kevin that he was making a terrible mistake. She said that Marcus was not just any customer. Kevin cut her off sharply. He told her to return to her station and let him handle this. Elena refused to move. She said Kevin needed to listen to her. This was important. Kevin's expression turned cold and he said, if Elena could not follow his directions, she could leave along with Marcus. The situation was escalating quickly. More customers had their devices out recording. Marcus could see the view counts climbing on the holographic displays some people had projected. This was becoming a viral incident. Marcus felt tired. Tired of fighting. Tired of proving himself. Tired of a world where a decorated officer could return home only to be treated like a threat because of how he looked. But his military training kept him calm and steady. He had faced enemy fire without flinching. He could certainly face this. An elderly man in the corner stood up from his table. He was thin and gray-haired with the bearing of someone who had served in uniform. He pointed at Marcus and said he recognized him from the military news broadcasts. He said Marcus was Commander Cole, the hero of Proxima Station. The old man's voice grew louder as he explained how Marcus had saved 3 million lives by holding the defense line when everyone said it was impossible. Kevin wheeled on the old man. He said the man must be mistaken or trying to help Marcus run some kind of scam. He said people were always trying to get free coffee by making up stories. The old man's face turned red with anger. He said he was a retired colonel and he knew a decorated officer when he saw one. Kevin dismissed him with a wave and turned back to Marcus. He raised his communication device and said he was calling security right now if Marcus did not leave. Marcus took a slow breath. He could feel the eyes of everyone in the cafe on him. He could see Elena's desperate expression and the old colonel's righteous anger. He could see Kevin's stubborn determination not to back. Kevin pressed the button on his communication device and the call connected immediately. His voice was steady as he spoke to the security company, requesting 2 officers to remove an unwanted person from the premises. Marcus listened to Kevin describe him as a potential threat who refused to leave. The words stung more than any physical wound Marcus had received in combat. He had fought to protect people like Kevin, and now Kevin saw him as a danger simply for existing in a space. The other customers in the cafe were divided in their reactions. Some looked uncomfortable and pretended to focus on their drinks. Others whispered to each other while keeping their devices pointed at the confrontation. A few people openly expressed their disapproval of what Kevin was doing. A woman in a business suit stood up and said this was wrong. She said Kevin should be ashamed of himself for treating someone this way. Kevin ignored her and kept his attention fixed on Marcus. Elena was shaking with anger and frustration. She pulled out her personal tablet and started searching through her files. She found what she was looking for and turned the screen toward Kevin. It was a photo from 8 years ago showing Marcus at the grand opening of the Stellar grounds. He stood behind the counter with a huge smile, wearing an apron with the Café logo. Several employees, including a much younger Elena, stood beside him. The image was clear and undeniable. Kevin glanced at the tablet screen and his expression hardened. He said the photo proved nothing. Anyone could fake images these days with the right software. He suggested Elena was being manipulated by someone claiming to be the owner. Kevin's voice took on a patronizing tone as he said he understood she wanted to help, but she was only making things worse. Elena's face went red and she raised her voice. She said she had worked at this cafe for 8 years, and she knew Marcus Cole when she saw him. The retired colonel who had spoken earlier stood up again. He moved closer to the confrontation with slow, deliberate steps. He said he had served 30 years in the Terran Defense Fleet, and he recognized leadership when he saw it. He pointed at Marcus and said this man had the bearing and scars of someone who had seen real combat. The colonel's voice grew louder as he said that Commander Cole had led the defense at Proxima Station when the Kryn attacked. He had held the line for 6 days with limited supplies and inferior numbers. The colonel said every person in this cafe owed their freedom to soldiers like Marcus. Kevin turned on the colonel with barely contained frustration. He accused the old man of being part of an elaborate scam designed to get free coffee or money from the business. Kevin said it was suspicious that this supposed colonel just happened to be in the cafe at the exact moment someone claiming to be a war hero showed up. He suggested they were working together. The colonel's face went white with rage, and he started to respond, but Marcus held up his hand. Marcus spoke in a calm voice that somehow carried through the entire cafe. He thanked the colonel for his words, but said he did not need anyone to defend him. He said he could prove his identity in seconds with his neural implant credentials, but he was choosing not to. Marcus looked directly at Kevin and said he wanted to understand why Kevin felt threatened by him. He asked what about his appearance made Kevin assume he did not belong in this cafe. Kevin's jaw tightened. He said Marcus was twisting the situation to make it about something it was not. He insisted this had nothing to do with how Marcus looked, and everything to do with maintaining the cafe's atmosphere. Kevin said the business district clientele expected a certain environment, and his job was to provide that. When Marcus pressed him to define what that environment was, Kevin struggled to articulate an answer that did not reveal his underlying assumptions. A young woman with pink hair and multiple piercings stood up from her table. She said she had been coming to the Stellar grounds for years before it changed. She remembered when everyone was welcome and people would spend hours here studying or working or just talking. She said the cafe used to feel like community and now it felt cold and exclusive. She asked Kevin directly when the cafe had started turning away people who did not look wealthy enough. Kevin snapped at her to sit down and mind her own business. More customers began to speak up. An older woman said she had stopped coming to the cafe 3 months ago because she felt unwelcome. A young man with a prosthetic leg said he was told last week that his appearance might disturb other customers. Another person mentioned the prices had tripled since Kevin took over as manager. Each testimony painted a picture of a cafe that had abandoned its original mission of inclusion for the sake of profit and exclusivity. Kevin's face was red now, and sweat beaded on his forehead. He raised his voice and said all of these changes were necessary to keep the business profitable. He said that when he took over as manager, the cafe was barely breaking even. The expenses were too high and the revenue too low. He had made difficult decisions to save the business from bankruptcy. Kevin looked around at the accusatory faces and said that everyone criticizing him would not be so quick to judge if they had to deal with angry investors and mounting debt. Elena stepped forward again. She said Kevin was not being completely honest about the financial situation. She revealed that she had been keeping detailed records of everything that happened at the cafe. Elena explained that yes, the cafe had financial challenges, but Kevin's solution was to drive away the loyal customers and chase wealthy ones who had no connection to the business. She said Kevin had fired 3 employees for not fitting his image of what staff should look like. She said he had removed the community board and canceled all the free events that brought people together. Kevin wheeled on Elena with anger flashing in his eyes. He said she had no right to question his management decisions. He was the manager and she was just a barista. Elena did not back down. She said she might be a barista, but she understood what this cafe was supposed to represent. She had stayed loyal through 7 years while Marcus was gone because she believed in his vision. Elena's voice cracked with emotion as she said watching Kevin destroy everything Marcus built was the hardest thing she had ever done. The front door of the cafe opened and 2 security officers walked in. They wore dark uniforms with stun weapons on their belts. The taller one had close-cropped gray hair and moved with military precision. The shorter officer was younger and looked uncertain about the situation. They approached Kevin, who immediately pointed at Marcus and began explaining that this individual was trespassing and refusing to leave the premises. The gray-haired security officer looked at Marcus and her entire demeanor changed. She stopped walking and her eyes went wide with recognition. She said a single word that cut through all the tension in the room. She said, "Commander." Her voice was filled with respect and surprise. The younger officer looked confused and asked what was happening. The gray-haired officer, whose name badge read Patricia Grant, told her partner to stand down immediately. Patricia Grant snapped to attention in a crisp military salute. She addressed Marcus by his full rank and commendation. She said she had served as military police during the Proxima campaign and had been at the joint operations briefings where Marcus's strategies were analyzed and praised. Patricia said it was an honor to meet him and she apologized profusely for responding to this call. She asked Marcus if he needed anything and said she would be happy to help in any way possible. The cafe erupted in noise. People who had been recording started talking excitedly into their devices. The customers who had defended Marcus felt vindicated. The ones who had stayed silent looked uncomfortable. Kevin stood frozen with his mouth open and his face drained of all color. His hand still held the communication device, but it hung limply at his side. The reality of what he had done crashed over him like a wave. Patricia Grant turned to Kevin with ice in her voice. She asked if he had really called security to remove the owner of the establishment and a decorated war hero. Kevin could not seem to form words. His mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. Patricia shook her head in disgust and said she would be filing a report about this incident. She told her partner they were leaving and advised Kevin to seriously reconsider his career choices. Marcus finally spoke. He thanked Patricia for her service and asked her to leave the report unfiled. He said this was a private matter that he would handle internally. Patricia looked reluctant but nodded in respect for his wishes. She saluted again and left with her partner. As the door closed behind them, the cafe fell into a tense silence. Everyone waited to see what Marcus would do next. Kevin found his voice. It came out as barely more than a whisper. He said he did not know. He repeated the words several times. He did not know Marcus was the owner. He did not know Marcus was a war hero. He did not know. Marcus looked at Kevin with an expression that was more sadness than anger. He said that was exactly the problem. Kevin did not know because he did not ask. He made assumptions based on nothing but appearance. Marcus said he could have revealed his identity immediately and prevented this entire situation. But he chose not to because he wanted to see what would happen. He wanted to understand what his cafe had become in his absence. He wanted to know if the man he trusted to run his business would treat a stranger with dignity and respect. Marcus pulled out one of the uncomfortable metal chairs and sat down heavily. His cybernetic arm whirred softly as he moved, and he rubbed his shoulder where the artificial limb connected to flesh. The long journey from the outer colonies had left him exhausted, and this confrontation had drained what little energy he had remaining. Elena and Kevin remained standing, both looking unsure of what to do or say. The silence stretched between them, filled with tension and unspoken words. Elena broke the silence first. She placed her tablet on the table in front of Marcus and sat down across from him. She said she had so much to tell him and she did not know where to start. Her voice was thick with emotion and tears formed in her eyes. She said she had tried so hard to keep the cafe running the way Marcus would have wanted, but the pressure from the investors had been overwhelming. Every month they demanded higher profits and threatened to pull their funding if targets were not met. Marcus listened without interrupting as Elena explained the financial situation. When he had left for military service, the cafe was doing well but not making huge profits. The war economy had changed everything. Prices for supplies increased dramatically, and many of the regular customers either left Earth to work in the colonies or stopped spending money on luxuries like coffee. The cafe started losing money every month. Elena had tried cutting costs, but it was not enough. That was when the investors approached Elena with an offer. 3 businessmen, led by someone named Gregory Hunt, offered to inject capital into the cafe to keep it afloat. In exchange, they wanted partial ownership and control over business decisions. Elena said she had tried to contact Marcus for approval, but communication with the outer colonies was difficult during active combat operations. Messages took weeks to arrive and responses even longer. She made the decision to accept their offer because the alternative was bankruptcy and closure. At first, the arrangement seemed to work. The investors provided money for repairs and supplies. They helped negotiate better deals with distributors. But then they started making demands. They wanted the cafe to target wealthier customers who would spend more money per visit. They suggested raising prices and removing things that encouraged people to stay too long, like the comfortable seating and free community board. Elena had resisted these changes as long as she could, but eventually the pressure became too much. That was when Kevin was hired. Elena admitted she had not been part of the hiring process. The investors and Marcus had conducted the interviews remotely and made the decision together. Kevin arrived with impressive credentials from several successful businesses in the luxury sector. He immediately began implementing changes that aligned with what the investors wanted. Elena said she tried to explain to Kevin what the cafe had originally been about, but he dismissed her concerns as sentimental attachment to an unsustainable business model. Marcus looked at Kevin, who still stood near the counter. Kevin's face was pale and his hands shook slightly. Marcus asked him to sit down and explain his perspective. Kevin hesitated, then pulled out a chair and sat stiffly. He said he needed Marcus to understand that he truly believed he was helping. When he took the manager position, the cafe was hemorrhaging money. The investors showed him financial projections that predicted complete failure within 6 months if drastic changes were not made. Kevin said he had worked in the service industry for 10 years. He knew what it took to make a business profitable in a competitive market. The old model of the stellar grounds was too idealistic for the current economy. Community spaces were nice in theory, but they did not pay the bills. Kevin explained that he made calculated business decisions based on data and market research. He increased prices to match what the location could support. He changed the furniture to increase customer turnover. He adjusted the atmosphere to attract high-spending professionals. Marcus asked Kevin about the people who were turned away or made to feel unwelcome. Kevin's jaw tightened and he looked down at the table. He said those were necessary casualties of the business transformation. He insisted he never discriminated based on race or any protected category. He simply enforced standards of appearance and behavior that matched the cafe's new positioning. Kevin said he turned away anyone who did not fit the image, whether they were veterans or students or elderly residents. Elena interrupted sharply. She said that was not true and Kevin knew it. She had witnessed Kevin treat people differently based on how they looked. She had watched him smile and welcome well-dressed white customers while viewing others with suspicion before they even reached the counter. Elena said she documented everything because she knew it was wrong, and she wanted evidence when Marcus returned. Kevin tried to protest, but Elena pulled up specific incidents on her tablet and read them aloud. There was the young black woman who was told the cafe was at capacity when there were clearly empty tables. The elderly Latino man with worn clothes who was asked to leave because he supposedly made other customers uncomfortable, even though he had done nothing wrong. The veteran with a prosthetic arm who was told there was a dress code that required long sleeves. Each incident had dates, times, and sometimes video footage from the cafe's security cameras. The evidence was damning and undeniable. Kevin's facade crumbled as Elena presented the evidence. His shoulders slumped and he put his face in his hands. He said he knew. He knew what he had been doing was wrong, but he convinced himself it was necessary. Kevin revealed that he had grown up poor and spent his entire childhood being judged and dismissed because of his circumstances. He fought hard to escape poverty and build a successful career. Somewhere along the way, he became the thing he once hated. He started judging others the way he had been judged. Marcus listened to Kevin's confession with a complicated mix of emotions. Part of him felt anger at how his dream had been corrupted. Part of him felt disappointment that someone he trusted had betrayed the cafe's values. But another part of him understood. War had taught Marcus that people were complex and rarely purely good or evil. Kevin had made terrible choices, but at least he seemed to recognize that now. The question was whether recognition of wrongdoing was enough. Before Marcus could respond, his communication device buzzed with an incoming call. He checked the screen and saw it was from an unknown number. He answered, and a smooth voice introduced itself as Gregory Hunt, lead investor in the Stellar Grounds. Hunt said he had been watching the situation unfold on social media, and he wanted to schedule an immediate meeting to discuss damage control. His tone suggested this was not a request. Marcus told Hunt he was busy and would contact him later. Hunt's voice turned cold. He said Marcus needed to understand the gravity of the situation. The viral incident was threatening the cafe's reputation, and by extension the investors' financial stake. Hunt said he was already in the area with the other investors and would arrive at the cafe in 10 minutes. Before Marcus could refuse, Hunt ended the call. Marcus looked at Elena and Kevin and said it appeared they were about to have more company. Elena's expression hardened. She said she had been expecting this. The investors had been monitoring social media mentions of the cafe obsessively ever since Kevin started making changes. Any negative publicity brought immediate phone calls and demands for explanations. Elena said Hunt was particularly aggressive about protecting his image as a successful businessman. He would not tolerate anything that made him or his investments look bad. Kevin said they needed to prepare for the worst. Hunt and the other investors had the legal right to call in their loans immediately if they felt the business was at risk. They could force the cafe into bankruptcy and take ownership through foreclosure. Kevin admitted he had seen Hunt do exactly that to another business that failed to meet expectations. The man was ruthless when it came to protecting his financial interests. Kevin said Marcus needed to be ready for a fight. Marcus stood and walked to the large window looking out at the street. He could see people walking past going about their normal lives. Just yesterday, he had been commanding a military operation to protect a mining colony. Now he was home dealing with business politics and social media crises. The contrast felt surreal. He thought about all the soldiers under his command who sacrificed so much to protect humanity. They fought believing they were defending something worth saving. But what was the point if the society they protected was built on exclusion and inequality? Elena came to stand beside Marcus at the window. She said she had something else to show him. She had been collecting evidence not just about Kevin's actions, but about the investors' involvement. Elena explained that she suspected the investors were not just pushing for profit, but actively encouraging discriminatory practices. She had recorded conversations and saved messages that proved they instructed Kevin to target specific demographics and discourage others. Marcus looked at the evidence Elena displayed on her tablet. There were messages from Hunt explicitly telling Kevin to focus on professional clientele and discourage anyone who did not match that profile. There was a recording of a phone call where Hunt said he did not care about community values. He cared about return on investment. There were financial projections that showed how removing lower-spending customers would increase revenue even. Gregory Hunt stood frozen as the implications of Elena's threat sank in. The other two investors exchanged nervous glances and shifted their weight uncomfortably. Hunt had built his reputation on being a savvy, ethical investor who supported community-focused businesses. If evidence emerged showing he had directed discriminatory practices, his entire business empire would collapse. Other investors would withdraw from his projects and his credibility would be destroyed forever. Hunt tried to regain control of the situation with bluster. He said Elena was making serious accusations without proof and threatened legal action for defamation. Elena calmly turned her tablet toward him and played a recording. Hunt's own voice came through clearly instructing Kevin to focus on professional demographics and discourage anyone who might lower the perceived value of the establishment. The recording was damning and Hunt's face drained of color as he heard his own words played back. Marcus watched Hunt squirm and felt no satisfaction in it. This was not about revenge or destroying anyone. This was about protecting what the cafe represented and ensuring it could continue serving its original purpose. Marcus said he was willing to negotiate a solution that would allow everyone to walk away with dignity intact. But first, Hunt and the other investors needed to be honest about their intentions and motivations. Hunt sat down heavily in one of the expensive chairs he had pressured Kevin to buy. He looked older suddenly, the confidence and aggression draining away. He admitted that when he first invested in the Stellar Grounds, he genuinely believed in its mission. But as the financial losses mounted, his priorities shifted. Hunt said he had other investors to answer to, and they did not care about community values, only returns on investment. He made choices he was not proud of to protect his own reputation and financial stability. The other two investors added their perspectives. One of them, a younger man named Paul Chen, said he had tried to argue against some of the changes, but Hunt overruled him. Paul said he came from a working-class background himself, and it bothered him to see people being excluded. But he stayed silent because he needed Hunt's connections for other business ventures. The third investor, an older woman named Linda Hayes, said she deeply regretted not speaking up more forcefully against the direction things were going. Marcus listened to each confession and saw the complexity of the situation. These were not evil people, just flawed humans who made poor choices under pressure. The same could be said about Kevin, who sat quietly watching everything unfold. Marcus thought about his military experience and the soldiers who made mistakes in the heat of combat. Punishment was sometimes necessary, but rehabilitation and growth mattered more than retribution. The question was whether these people could change and whether Marcus should give them that chance. Kevin finally spoke up. His voice was hoarse and strained. He said he wanted everyone to know that regardless of what happened to him, he took full responsibility for his actions. Kevin acknowledged that Hunt and the investors created pressure, but he made the choice to follow their instructions. He could have refused or quit if he felt what they wanted was wrong. Kevin said he deserved whatever consequences came from his decisions, and he would accept them without complaint. Marcus appreciated Kevin's acceptance of responsibility, but pointed out that acknowledging wrongdoing was only the first step. The real question was what Kevin would do differently in the future. Kevin admitted he did not have a good answer yet. He said he needed to do serious work on himself to understand his own biases and why he made the choices he made. Kevin offered his resignation effective immediately and said he would not contest any negative references or public statements about his management. Marcus stood and walked around the cafe, looking at all the changes that had been made. The expensive furniture, the cold lighting, the bare walls. None of it felt like home. He turned back to the assembled group and said he needed time to think about everything before making any decisions. He told Hunt and the other investors to leave and come back the next day. He said he would have terms for them then and they could decide whether to accept or fight. Hunt started to protest but saw the steel in Marcus's expression and wisely stayed silent. After the investors left, Marcus sat back down with Elena and Kevin. The three of them sat in silence for several minutes. Finally, Marcus asked Elena what she thought should happen. Elena said she believed Kevin should not be immediately fired. She had watched him over the past months and saw moments where he seemed uncomfortable with his own actions. Elena thought Kevin had the capacity to learn and grow if given the chance. But she also understood why others might want him removed immediately. Marcus asked Kevin what he wanted. Kevin said honestly he did not know if he deserved a second chance, but he would do anything for the opportunity to make things right. He said he would work for free, undergo any training required, and submit to whatever oversight Marcus thought appropriate. Kevin said he realized how much damage he had caused and he wanted to be part of fixing it, rather than just disappearing and letting someone else clean up his mess. Marcus told Kevin to go home and rest. He said they would talk more tomorrow after Marcus had time to think. Kevin nodded and stood up slowly. Before leaving, he turned to Elena and apologized sincerely for dismissing her concerns and treating her disrespectfully. Elena accepted his apology with a nod, but her expression remained guarded. Kevin left through the back door and Marcus and Elena were alone in the cafe. Elena made coffee for both of them, using the expensive machine that had replaced the old reliable one Marcus remembered. The coffee tasted good but somehow lacked the warmth and character of what the cafe used to serve. Elena sat down across from Marcus and said she needed to apologize too. She felt like she had failed to protect his dream while he was gone. Marcus shook his head and said Elena had done more than anyone could have expected. She documented everything, resisted as much as she could, and ultimately provided the evidence that gave him leverage. Without Elena's courage and loyalty, the situation would be much worse. They talked for hours about the cafe's history and what it had meant to the community. Elena shared stories Marcus had missed during his 7 years away. She told him about the regular customer who proposed to his girlfriend at a corner table, the homeless veteran who slowly got his life together with encouragement and job referrals from other customers, the high school students who studied together and went on to college, all the small human connections that made the Stellar Grounds special. Most of those people stopped coming after Kevin's changes took effect. Marcus felt the loss of those connections deeply. He had founded the cafe specifically to create a space where those interactions could happen, where people from different backgrounds could meet and recognize their shared humanity, where veterans could transition back to civilian life surrounded by support, where anyone could feel welcome regardless of their appearance or economic status. All of that had been sacrificed for profit margins and investor returns. Elena said something had to change fundamentally if the cafe was going to survive as anything other than a soulless business. She suggested Marcus buy out the investors and return to independent ownership. Elena had been researching the numbers and thought it might be possible with the right financing. Marcus liked the idea but said he did not have enough personal savings after 7 years of military service. His pay had been decent but not enough to buy out 3 investors who had sunk significant capital into the business. Elena smiled and showed Marcus something on her tablet. While he was dealing with the confrontation, social media had exploded with support for him. The videos of the incident had millions of views. People were sharing their own stories of discrimination and praising Marcus for his dignity and restraint. Several prominent figures had commented on the situation, and someone had started a crowdfunding campaign to help Marcus regain control of his cafe. In just a few hours, the campaign had raised enough money to buy out the investors twice over. Marcus stared at the numbers in disbelief. Thousands of people had contributed amounts ranging from a few dollars to several thousand. The messages attached to donations were heartfelt and moving. Veterans thanked him for his service and said they understood what he was fighting for now. People who had faced discrimination said his stand meant something important. Business owners said they were inspired to prioritize values over pure profit. The outpouring of support was overwhelming. Elena said this was bigger than just one cafe now. Marcus had become a symbol of resistance against the kind of exclusion and inequality that had become normalized. People were looking to him for leadership on these issues. Elena said if he handled the situation well, he could inspire real change in how businesses think about community responsibility. But if he handled it poorly or just disappeared, the moment would be lost and nothing would improve. The weight of that responsibility settled on Marcus's shoulders. He had not wanted to be a symbol or a leader of a social movement. He just wanted to come home and have a cup of coffee. But his military training had taught him that leadership was not about what you wanted, but about what was needed. People were looking to him for guidance, and he could not ignore that call anymore. Marcus woke early the next morning with clarity about what needed to happen. He had spent hours the previous night analyzing the situation from every angle, using the same strategic thinking that made him a successful military commander. The solution required balancing justice with mercy, accountability with opportunity for growth, and immediate action with long-term sustainability. It would not satisfy everyone, but that was the nature of leadership. He contacted Elena first and asked her to meet him at the cafe before it opened. When she arrived, Marcus outlined his plan. He would use the crowd-funded money combined with his military savings to buy out the investors completely. The cafe would return to independent ownership, but this time Elena would become a partner and co-owner. She had earned that position through years of loyalty and her courage in documenting the corruption. Elena protested that she did not have money to invest, but Marcus said her sweat equity and dedication were investment enough. Elena was overwhelmed, and tears streamed down her face. She said she never expected such recognition and did not know if she deserved it. Marcus told her firmly that she absolutely deserved it. Elena had kept the cafe alive through impossible circumstances and had maintained integrity when it would have been easier to go along with the changes. Marcus said the cafe's future needed to be built by people who never lost sight of its purpose. Elena accepted the partnership with a trembling voice, and they shook hands to seal the agreement. Next, Marcus addressed the Kevin question. He told Elena he had decided Kevin would not be fired, but he also would not remain as manager. Instead, Kevin would work under Elena's supervision as a trainee, learning what the cafe was truly meant to represent. Kevin would take a substantial pay cut with his salary, going to veteran support organizations. He would also lead diversity and inclusion training programs using his own failures as teaching examples. If Kevin completed 1 year successfully, they would reevaluate his position. If he failed or quit, there would be no second chances. Elena asked if Marcus thought Kevin could really change. Marcus said honestly he did not know, but the attempt mattered. He had seen soldiers make terrible mistakes in combat and then grow into exemplary leaders through accountability and mentorship. Kevin deserved the chance to prove whether he could do the same. More importantly, visible redemption sent a message that change was possible. If people only saw punishment without rehabilitation, they would never believe growth was achievable. But if Kevin genuinely transformed, it would inspire others to confront their own biases. Marcus scheduled a meeting with Hunt and the other investors for that afternoon. Before they arrived, he prepared detailed terms for the buyout. He would pay them back their initial investment plus a modest return, but nothing more. In exchange, they would sign agreements releasing all claims to the cafe and promising not to interfere with its operations. They would also agree not to disparage the business publicly. If they refused these terms, Marcus would allow Elena to release her evidence and let the legal system sort things out. It was not a negotiation, it was a take-it-or-leave-it offer. When Hunt and the others arrived, Marcus presented his terms clearly and without emotion. Hunt's face went red as he listened, and he started to argue that the offer was unreasonable. Marcus interrupted and asked if Hunt wanted Elena to release the recordings publicly. Hunt fell silent. The other two investors, Paul Chen and Linda Hayes, looked at each other and nodded. Paul said they would accept the terms. Hunt glared at them but realized he was outvoted. He signed the agreement with visible anger, but he signed it. Within an hour, the investors were out of the cafe's ownership permanently. With the investors handled, Marcus turned his attention to the public response. The incident had gone viral and media outlets were demanding interviews. Marcus knew he needed to address the situation publicly, but he wanted to do it on his own terms. He decided to hold a press conference at the Stellar grounds and stream it globally. He would explain what happened, announce the changes, and outline his vision for the cafe's future. It would be his opportunity to turn a negative incident into a positive movement. Marcus contacted Kevin and asked him to be present at the press conference. Kevin was terrified at the prospect, but Marcus said it was necessary. People needed to see Kevin take responsibility publicly and commit to change. Running away would accomplish nothing and teach nothing. Kevin reluctantly agreed and spent hours preparing what he would say. He wrote and rewrote his statement dozens of times, trying to find words that expressed genuine remorse without making excuses. The press conference was scheduled for the following afternoon. News crews arrived early and set up cameras throughout the cafe. Marcus had insisted the event be held inside the cafe rather than some sterile conference room. He wanted people to see the space and understand what it represented. Elena coordinated everything with her usual efficiency, while Kevin stood nervously in the corner reviewing his notes for the 100th time. When Marcus stepped up to the cluster of microphones, the room fell silent. Cameras focused on him and millions of people across Earth and the colonies tuned in to watch. Marcus began by thanking everyone for their attention and their overwhelming support. He acknowledged that the incident at his cafe had sparked important conversations about discrimination, veteran treatment, and business responsibility. He said he hoped to use this moment to push for real change rather than just temporary outrage. Marcus explained the cafe's original mission and how it had been corrupted during his absence. He took partial responsibility for not maintaining better oversight while he was deployed. He announced that he had bought out the investors and returned the cafe to independent ownership with Elena as his partner. Marcus praised Elena's loyalty and courage in protecting the cafe's values despite tremendous pressure. He said she deserved recognition not just as an employee, but as a leader who embodied everything the cafe stood for. Then Marcus addressed the Kevin situation directly. He acknowledged that many people wanted Kevin fired immediately, and he understood that reaction. But Marcus explained his decision to give Kevin a structured opportunity for redemption. He said punishment alone did not create a better society. Real change required accountability combined with support for growth. Kevin would work under supervision, undergo training, contribute to veteran causes, and use his experience to help others recognize their own biases. If Kevin succeeded, it would prove that people could change. If he failed, at least the attempt was made. Marcus invited Kevin to step forward, and several reporters gasped audibly. Kevin approached the microphones with his hands shaking. He read from his prepared statement, but his voice cracked with emotion. Kevin said he had made terrible choices based on unconscious biases he refused to examine. He said there was no excuse for treating people with disrespect, and he took full responsibility for his actions. Kevin acknowledged that many people would never forgive him, and that was their right. But he committed to spending the next year proving through actions that he could do better. Kevin announced he would work for minimum wage with his entire salary donated to veteran support organizations. He would complete extensive training on bias, discrimination, and inclusive leadership. He would speak publicly about his failures to help others avoid the same mistakes. Kevin said if anyone felt he should not receive this opportunity, he understood their anger. He said all he asked was the chance to become a better person and contribute to fixing the harm he caused. When Kevin finished, he stepped back from the microphones with tears running down his face. The reaction from reporters and viewers was mixed. Some praised Marcus's balanced approach while others criticized it as too lenient. Veterans were divided, with some supporting the redemption framework and others demanding harsher consequences. Business leaders expressed interest in the model of values-driven ownership. Social justice advocates debated whether giving Kevin a second chance sent the wrong message or the right one. The conversation was messy and complicated, exactly as Marcus expected. Marcus fielded questions from reporters for over an hour. He was asked if he felt discriminated against because of his race. Marcus said yes, absolutely, and that was exactly why this mattered. He was asked if he would pursue legal action against the investors. Marcus said no, because the goal was change, not revenge. He was asked if he worried about the cafe's financial viability with the old community-focused model. Marcus said he would rather have a modestly profitable business that served its purpose than a wealthy one that betrayed its values. One reporter asked the question many people wanted answered. She asked why Marcus had not immediately revealed his identity and ended the confrontation before it escalated. Marcus took a long breath before responding. He said he wanted to experience what ordinary people face every day when they are judged by appearance. Veterans with visible injuries, people of color, anyone who does not fit narrow definitions of acceptable. If he had used his rank and achievements as a shield, it would have protected him, but done nothing for others, who face the same treatment without medals to hide behind. Marcus announced he was establishing a foundation to support veteran-owned businesses and community-focused enterprises. The foundation would provide grants. The renovation of the Stellar grounds began 3 days after the press conference. Marcus arrived early each morning to work alongside Elena, Kevin, and a crew of volunteers who had offered their help. Many of the volunteers were veterans who understood what Marcus was fighting for and wanted to contribute. Others were former customers who remembered what the cafe used to be and wanted to help restore it. The work was hard and physical, but there was a sense of purpose that made it meaningful. The first task was removing all the expensive, uncomfortable furniture Kevin had purchased. Marcus felt satisfaction watching the cold metal tables and chairs being hauled out to storage. They would be sold and the money donated to community organizations. In their place came comfortable couches, mismatched wooden tables, and cushioned chairs that invited people to sit and stay a while. The harsh white lighting was replaced with warm bulbs that created a welcoming glow. The bare walls were painted in the original orange and brown tones Marcus had chosen years ago. Kevin worked harder than anyone during the renovation. He arrived before everyone else and left after they were done. His hands developed blisters from painting and his back ached from moving furniture. But he never complained or asked for breaks. Marcus watched Kevin carefully during those first days, looking for signs of resentment or resistance. Instead, he saw genuine effort and humility. Kevin listened when veterans shared their stories and asked thoughtful questions. He apologized personally to several former customers who came to help and accepted their anger without making excuses. One afternoon, a young veteran named Carlos Martinez arrived at the cafe. He was the man with the prosthetic leg, who Kevin had turned away weeks earlier for supposedly violating a dress code that did not exist. Carlos saw Kevin painting in the corner and his expression hardened. He approached Kevin and asked if he remembered him. Kevin stopped painting and nodded. He said yes, he remembered, and he was deeply sorry for what he had done. Carlos studied Kevin for a long moment, then asked if the apology was genuine or just for show. Kevin met Carlos's eyes directly and said he could not prove his sincerity with words. All he could do was show it through sustained action over time. Kevin explained the terms of his probation and his commitment to change. He said if Carlos or anyone else never forgave him, that was completely understandable. Kevin said he was not asking for forgiveness, just the opportunity to do better going forward. Carlos considered this, then picked up a paintbrush and said he would judge Kevin by his actions, not his promises. The two men worked side by side for the rest of the afternoon in tense but not hostile silence. Elena took charge of the operational restoration. She reinstated the community board where people could post job opportunities, event announcements, and requests for help. She brought back the old reliable coffee machines that produced excellent drinks without pretension. She lowered prices to levels that working-class families could afford and implemented a sliding scale for people facing financial hardship. Elena also rehired 2 of the employees Kevin had fired for not fitting his image standards. Both returned gratefully and added to the growing team. Marcus spent time each day meeting with community leaders and veteran organizations. He explained his vision for the cafe as a model of inclusive business practice. Many organizations offered partnerships and support. The local Veterans Center wanted to host weekly support groups at the cafe. A job training program asked about using the space for workshops. Artists requested wall space to display their work. Each conversation reinforced Marcus's belief that there was deep hunger for spaces that prioritized community over profit. During the renovation, Marcus also worked on establishing his foundation. He consulted with lawyers and financial advisors to structure it properly. The foundation would provide grants to veteran-owned businesses and training programs for entrepreneurs who wanted to build community-focused enterprises. Marcus used some of his military savings and a portion of the crowd-funded money to establish an initial endowment. He recruited board members from diverse backgrounds, including veterans, business leaders, and social justice advocates. The foundation would launch officially in 3 months. Kevin began his formal training 2 weeks into the renovation. Elena arranged for him to meet with a diversity consultant named Dr. Sharon West, who specialized in helping people recognize and address unconscious bias. Kevin's first session with Dr. West was uncomfortable and confrontational. She did not let him hide behind generalizations or abstract concepts. She pushed him to examine specific incidents and articulate exactly what assumptions he made and why. Kevin left that first session emotionally drained, but with a better understanding of how deeply his biases ran. Dr. West assigned Kevin homework that required serious self-reflection. He had to write about his own experiences of being judged and how those experiences felt. Then he had to compare that to how he judged others. The exercise was painful because Kevin realized he had become exactly what he once hated. He had spent years fighting against being dismissed for his background, only to turn around and dismiss others for theirs. The recognition of this pattern was humbling and necessary. Kevin also attended veteran support group meetings as an observer. Marcus arranged this with the group facilitator, a retired therapist named Helen Kim who had worked with combat veterans for decades. Helen was skeptical about allowing Kevin to attend but agreed after Marcus explained his reasoning. Kevin sat quietly in the corner during the first meeting, while veterans shared their struggles with civilian reintegration. He heard stories of being treated as damaged or dangerous. He heard about job discrimination and social isolation. He heard pain that sounded eerily familiar to his own treatment of others. After the third meeting, one of the veterans approached Kevin. His name was James Porter, and he had severe facial scarring from combat injuries. James said he heard about what happened at the cafe and wanted to thank Kevin for not just disappearing. James explained that when people made mistakes and then vanished, it taught others that change was impossible. But when someone stayed and did the hard work of transformation, it gave hope. James said he did not forgive Kevin yet, but he respected the attempt to grow. Those words meant more to Kevin than any praise could have. Marcus watched Kevin's progress carefully over those weeks. He saw genuine effort, but also moments of struggle. One afternoon, Kevin lost his temper when a customer complained loudly about the slower service that came with training new staff. Kevin snapped at the customer before catching himself and apologizing immediately. Marcus pulled Kevin aside afterward, and they talked about managing frustration and recognizing when stress triggered old patterns. It was a setback, but also a learning opportunity. Progress was not linear. The cafe's reopening was scheduled for exactly 1 month after the incident. Marcus wanted to give enough time for meaningful changes, but not so much time that momentum was lost. Elena coordinated everything with her characteristic efficiency. Invitations went out to former customers, community organizations, and local media. Marcus decided not to make it a huge production. The cafe would simply open its doors and welcome whoever chose to come. No speeches or ceremonies, just coffee and community in a restored space. The night before reopening, Marcus walked through the completed renovation. The cafe looked like it had in the early days, warm and welcoming with personality in every corner. The community board was already filling with postings. The comfortable furniture invited people to relax and connect. The lighting created an atmosphere of safety and inclusion. Everything was ready. Marcus felt a mix of excitement and nervousness. Would people come? Would they give the cafe another chance? Would the financial model prove sustainable? Tomorrow would begin answering those questions. Elena joined Marcus in his walkthrough. She pointed out small details he might have missed, like the photos she had framed, showing the cafe through the years. There were images of the grand opening, of regular customers who had become friends, of community events that brought people together. The photos told the story of what the stellar grounds had meant to people. Elena said she hoped the cafe could create new memories like those again. Marcus said he believed it would. Kevin arrived at the cafe late that evening to do a final check of his stations. He had been assigned to work the counter under Elena's direct supervision. His job was to greet customers, take orders, and make drinks. Simple tasks that would test whether he could treat everyone with equal respect and dignity. Kevin was terrified of making another mistake, but also determined to prove he had learned. He reviewed his training materials one more time and practiced greeting imaginary customers with genuine warmth. The work felt awkward, but he persisted. Marcus found Kevin practicing his greetings and watched for a moment before speaking. He said Kevin looked nervous, and Kevin admitted he was terrified. Marcus understood that fear. He remembered his first day commanding soldiers in combat, the weight of responsibility and the terror of making mistakes that could cost lives. This was different, but the fundamental challenge was similar. Kevin would be under intense scrutiny, and any mistake would be magnified. Marcus told Kevin to focus on one customer at a time and remember why this work mattered. If he stayed present and genuine. The line outside the stellar grounds stretched down the block when Marcus arrived at dawn on reopening day. He stopped and stared at the crowd in disbelief. Hundreds of people waited patiently to be among the first customers in the restored cafe. Some held signs expressing support. Others wore shirts with messages about inclusion and community. Veterans stood alongside civilians, elderly residents next to young students. People of every background united in their desire to be part of something meaningful. Elena was already inside preparing with the staff. She saw Marcus through the window and waved him in through the back entrance. Her face was flushed with excitement and a little bit of panic. She said they had not expected this kind of turnout and were scrambling to ensure they had enough supplies. Marcus helped carry additional stock from the storage room while Elena coordinated the team. Kevin arrived and immediately began checking equipment and reviewing his training notes one final time. At exactly 7 in the morning, Marcus unlocked the front door and welcomed the first customers. The crowd cheered and people began filing in with smiles and words of encouragement. The retired colonel who had defended Marcus during the original incident was first in line. He shook Marcus's hand firmly and said this was a great day for the community. Behind him came former regulars who had stopped visiting during Kevin's management. They looked around at the restored atmosphere with visible emotion, and several had tears in their eyes. Carlos Martinez, the veteran Kevin had turned away, entered with a group of other veterans. They wore matching shirts identifying them as members of the local Veteran Support Center. Carlos approached the counter where Kevin stood, and the cafe fell quiet as people watched to see what would happen. Kevin greeted Carlos professionally and asked what he could get for him. Carlos studied Kevin for a long moment, then ordered a coffee. When Kevin handed him the drink, Carlos said he would be watching. Kevin nodded and said he expected nothing less. The morning rush was intense. Every table filled within the first hour, and people were willing to wait for seats. Elena moved through the cafe with grace and efficiency, coordinating staff and ensuring smooth operations. Kevin worked the counter under her close supervision, greeting each customer with careful attention. A few people recognized him and their expressions turned cold, but most treated him neutrally. Kevin maintained his composure and professionalism, even when facing obvious hostility. It was harder than he expected, but he persisted. Around mid-morning, an elderly black woman approached Marcus. She introduced herself as Dorothy Williams and said she had been a regular customer in the cafe's early years. Dorothy explained that she stopped coming after Kevin's changes made her feel unwelcome. She did not say anything specific happened to her, just a general sense that she no longer belonged in the space. Dorothy said she was glad to see the cafe return to its roots and she hoped it would stay that way. Marcus assured her it would and thanked her for giving them another chance. Throughout the day, people shared similar stories with Marcus. The cafe had meant something important to them, and losing it had created a void in their lives. Some found other coffee shops, but none felt the same. Others simply stopped having a regular gathering place. The Stellar Grounds had been more than just a business to these people. It had been a community hub where connections formed and belonging was guaranteed. Its restoration represented something larger than coffee and comfortable chairs. It represented the possibility that values and community could survive in an increasingly commercialized world. The afternoon brought a different crowd. Business professionals from the surrounding offices came in for their caffeine fixes. Some were former customers from Kevin's era who had enjoyed the exclusive atmosphere. A few of them looked around at the diverse clientele and comfortable seating with visible displeasure. One man in an expensive suit complained to Elena that the cafe was too crowded and noisy. Elena politely explained that community spaces were meant to be full and lively. The man left without ordering and Elena shrugged. Not every customer was the right fit, and that was okay. Kevin faced his hardest test around 3 in the afternoon when a group of activists entered the cafe. They recognized him immediately and approached the counter with confrontational energy. One of them, a young woman with determination in her eyes, said they were there to ensure Kevin understood that his probation did not erase his actions. She said marginalized people deserved more than performative redemption, and they would be monitoring whether real change occurred. Kevin listened without defensiveness and said he agreed completely. He welcomed their scrutiny and said accountability required witnesses who would not accept empty gestures. The activists seemed surprised by Kevin's response. They had expected defensiveness or resentment. Instead, Kevin engaged them in a thoughtful conversation about what genuine change looked like, and how people harmed by discrimination could trust those who claimed to be doing better. The conversation lasted nearly 30 minutes and ended with the activists agreeing to return regularly to observe. One of them said if Kevin's transformation proved real, they would consider it a model for holding people accountable while allowing growth. If it proved superficial, they would expose that too. Kevin said that was exactly as it should be. By early evening, the cafe was still full, but the pace had slowed enough for everyone to catch their breath. Marcus gathered the staff for a quick meeting in the back room. He thanked them for their incredible work and said the reopening exceeded his best hopes. Elena presented preliminary numbers showing they had served 3 times their projected customer count. Revenue was strong and customer feedback was overwhelmingly positive. There were challenges to address, but the foundation was solid. The team cheered and hugged each other with the exhaustion and satisfaction of a mission accomplished. Marcus asked Kevin to stay after the meeting ended. He wanted to debrief about Kevin's experience and assess how he was handling the pressure. Kevin admitted it was harder than he anticipated, facing people he had wronged and absorbing their justified anger. But he said it was also necessary, and he felt like he was beginning to understand the weight of his actions in a way he had not before. Marcus said that was exactly the kind of growth he had hoped to see. Kevin's journey was just beginning, but he was moving in the right direction. The evening brought a different atmosphere to the cafe. A local musician set up in the corner and began playing soft jazz on an acoustic guitar. People settled into comfortable chairs with books or conversations. Students spread out homework across tables. A group of elderly residents played cards in the back section. Parents brought children for hot chocolate before bedtime. The diversity of the crowd was natural and unforced. This was what Marcus had envisioned from the beginning, a space where humanity's differences were welcomed and celebrated rather than merely tolerated. As the cafe approached closing time, Marcus stood by the window looking out at the street. The day had been a success by any measure, but he knew this was just the beginning. The real test would come in the following weeks and months. Could they maintain this atmosphere and financial viability long-term? Would Kevin continue growing, or would he revert to old patterns under pressure? Would customers remain loyal, or was today just novelty? These questions would be answered only through sustained effort and commitment. Elena joined Marcus at the window. She was exhausted but happy. She said today felt like the cafe she remembered from years ago, full of life and connection and purpose. Marcus agreed and thanked her for everything she had done to make this possible. Without her documentation and courage, the cafe would have remained under the investor's control, serving a narrow demographic. Elena blushed at the praise and said she was just protecting something she believed in. Marcus said that was exactly what made her a leader. The last customers left around 10 at night. The staff cleaned up while sharing stories from the day. Kevin worked alongside everyone else without complaint, mopping floors and wiping tables. Carlos Martinez approached Kevin before leaving and said he handled himself well today. Carlos said the real test would be tomorrow and next week and next month, maintaining consistency when the spotlight faded. Kevin thanked him for the observation and said he understood. Carlos nodded and said he would be back to check. It was not quite forgiveness, but it was acknowledgement, and that mattered. After everyone else left, Marcus, Elena, and Kevin sat together in the empty cafe. They were too tired to talk much, but the silence was comfortable. They had accomplished something meaningful today. They had proven that a business could thrive while staying true to inclusive values. They had shown that people who made serious mistakes could be given structured opportunities for redemption. They had created a space that brought diverse people together, rather than sorting them into acceptable and unacceptable categories. It was one day, but it was a start. Marcus received several messages that evening from business owners and community leaders. Many expressed interest in learning from the Stellar Grounds model. Some wanted advice on implementing inclusive practices in their own establishments. Others offered partnerships and collaborations. The foundation Marcus was building already had a waiting list of applicants seeking grants. 6 months passed, and the Stellar Grounds settled into a rhythm that felt both familiar and new. The cafe opened each morning to regular customers who had made it part of their daily routine. Veterans gathered for their weekly support group meetings facilitated by Helen Kim. Students claimed tables for study sessions that lasted hours. Artists rotated their work on the walls, creating a gallery that changed monthly. The community board overflowed with postings connecting people to jobs, housing, and opportunities. The space hummed with life and purpose. Elena had grown into her role as co-owner and general manager with impressive skill. She implemented systems that balanced efficiency with humanity, ensuring operations ran smoothly without sacrificing the personal touch that made the cafe special. Elena hired staff who understood and embraced the mission, building a team that reflected the community's diversity. She negotiated supplier contracts that kept costs manageable while maintaining quality. Under her leadership, the cafe was both profitable and principled, proving the two were not mutually exclusive. Marcus divided his time between the cafe and his foundation work. The Stellar Foundation had grown rapidly, providing grants to 30 veteran-owned businesses and training over 200 entrepreneurs in community-focused business practices. Marcus traveled to different colonies and Earth cities speaking about inclusive leadership and the importance of businesses serving social missions beyond profit. His military background gave him credibility, and his cafe provided a concrete example of principles in action. The work was exhausting but deeply satisfying. Kevin's transformation had been gradual but genuine. He completed his initial training program with Dr. Sharon West and continued meeting with her monthly for ongoing development. Kevin led diversity workshops twice a week, sharing his story as a cautionary tale and teaching others to recognize their own biases. His willingness to be vulnerable and honest made him an effective educator. People who initially dismissed him as performative began to acknowledge his growth. Carlos Martinez eventually told Kevin that while forgiveness took time, respect could be earned through consistent action. Kevin had earned some respect. Kevin's role at the cafe evolved as he proved himself reliable. Elena promoted him to assistant manager with carefully defined responsibilities. He supervised new staff training and handled customer concerns under Elena's oversight. Kevin no longer made unilateral decisions without consultation, and he consistently sought input from team members before implementing changes. The activists who had confronted him on reopening day became regular customers, and while they maintained healthy skepticism, they acknowledged his growth. One of them even invited Kevin to speak at a community forum about accountability and redemption. The cafe faced challenges during those months. There were days when customer counts dropped and revenue fell short of projections. A competitor opened nearby with a more upscale approach that drew away some business district professionals. Equipment broke down, requiring expensive repairs. Staff turnover created training burdens. Marcus and Elena navigated each challenge with patience and strategic thinking. They cut costs where possible without compromising their values. They adjusted pricing structures to improve margins while keeping the sliding scale for those in need. They invested in staff development to reduce turnover. Slowly, the financial picture stabilized. The partnership with Admiral Chen and the military came together after months of negotiation. The Stellar Grounds became a pilot location for a new veteran transition program that provided job training, mental health support, and community integration services. The military funded part of the program, while the cafe provided space and Marcus offered guidance. The partnership was structured to preserve the cafe's independence and community focus, while adding resources that helped veterans adjust to civilian life. Early results showed promising improvements in veteran employment and well-being. Other businesses began adopting the Stellar Grounds model with varying degrees of success. Some implemented inclusive practices effectively and saw both community impact and financial viability. Others struggled with the balance or gave up when profits did not immediately increase. Marcus learned that sustainable change required more than good intentions. It demanded careful planning, consistent effort, and willingness to accept lower profit margins than pure profit-maximizing approaches would generate. Not every business owner was willing or able to make those trade-offs. Marcus received a message one morning that pulled him back to military concerns. Admiral Chen contacted him about a developing situation in the outer colonies. A new threat had emerged and the fleet was mobilizing. Chen said they needed experienced commanders and Marcus was at the top of the recall list. She gave him 48 hours to decide whether he would return to active duty. The message ended with acknowledgement that Marcus had important work happening, but the fleet genuinely needed him. The choice was his. Marcus sat with the message for a long time, considering what to do. Part of him felt the pull of military service, the clear mission and defined command structure. He was good at that work and people depended on him. But Marcus looked around the cafe and saw different people who depended on him in different ways. Veterans finding community and support, customers connecting across differences, staff learning that businesses could operate ethically, Kevin growing into a better version of himself, Elena building something sustainable and meaningful. All of this would continue without him, but his presence mattered. Marcus discussed the decision with Elena over coffee. She said she would support whatever he chose, but hoped he would stay. The cafe and foundation needed his leadership and his vision. Elena said there were plenty of capable military commanders, but fewer people willing to fight for inclusive communities with the same intensity Marcus brought. She reminded him that service took many forms, and protecting humanity from internal divisions was as important as defending against external threats. Marcus appreciated her perspective, but said he needed time to think. Kevin approached Marcus later that day and said he had overheard the conversation about military recall. Kevin said he owed Marcus everything, and if Marcus needed to leave, Kevin would do whatever it took to ensure the cafe maintained its mission. Marcus was touched by Kevin's commitment, but also recognized how much Kevin had grown. 6 months ago, Kevin would have seen Marcus's departure as opportunity to regain control. Now he saw it as responsibility to preserve something larger than himself. That growth represented exactly what Marcus had hoped to achieve. That evening, Marcus went to the Veteran Support Group meeting. He sat in his usual corner listening to people share their struggles and successes. James Porter talked about finding a job with an employer who valued his skills rather than judging his appearance. Dorothy Williams mentioned how the cafe had become her second home, and she felt connected to community again. Carlos Martinez shared that he was starting classes to finish his degree with encouragement from people he met at the cafe. Each story reinforced the impact of what they had built together. After the meeting ended, Helen Kim asked Marcus if he had a minute to talk. She said she noticed he seemed distracted and wondered if everything was okay. Marcus explained the recall situation and his uncertainty about what to do. Helen listened carefully, then said something that crystallized his thinking. She said Marcus had fought a war to protect people's right to live in dignity and peace. Now he was doing the same work, but on a different battlefield. The enemies were bias, exclusion, and the belief that profit mattered more than people. That war needed commanders too. Marcus made his decision that night. He composed a message to Admiral Chen, thanking her for the opportunity but declining the recall. He explained that he had found a different mission that required his full commitment. Marcus said he would remain available for consultation if the fleet needed strategic input. But his place was here, building models of inclusive community that proved humanity's strength came from embracing diversity rather than fearing it. Chen responded within hours, expressing disappointment but understanding. She said the fleet would miss him, but Earth needed leaders like him too. The next morning, Marcus arrived at the cafe early and found Elena already there preparing for the day. He told her about his decision to stay, and she broke into a huge smile. Elena hugged him tightly and said she was relieved. Together, they would continue building something meaningful. Marcus said he wanted to expand their vision, opening 2 more cafe locations in underserved neighborhoods. Elena had been managing operational details that freed him for foundation work. It was time to leverage that partnership to scale their impact. Elena agreed enthusiastically, and they began planning immediately. Over the following weeks, Marcus and Elena scouted locations for expansion. They found 2 neighborhoods that lacked community gathering spaces and had significant veteran populations. Marcus secured funding through the foundation and private donors who believed in the mission. Elena developed operational plans that would replicate the original cafe's culture, while adapting to each neighborhood's specific needs. They hired local residents as staff and partnered with community organizations to ensure the cafe served real needs rather than imposing external visions.